every time you use your axe, you think you're doing something good by taking a coarse, bastard file or an axe file, grinding it to an edge, right? That is going to wear that thing out. If you're in your 20s, that axe might not last you a lifetime. Hey, it's Greg here with Outdoors on the Cheap, and I got a viewer question I was going to answer. It's from Jonathan Gilmore, and he asks, once I sharpen my axe, how long should I expect it to last if I take proper care of it? And I think that's, so the short answer is it should last a lifetime if you take proper care of it. I suppose if you're lucky, and I suppose if you resist the urge to be a nice guy and lend it to people. Okay, so let me start in reverse order. Resist the urge to lend it to people. We all want to be nice people, and we want to loan people things. But people that are not skilled with axes tend to be very, very hard on them. The number one thing you do not want to do with an axe is drive it into the ground. So drive it into the ground on purpose, like you're trying to remove a tree and you start cutting into the roots where they are on the ground because you want to get the roots out of the ground. Or you're splitting wood and you've got a stump on the ground and you're hitting it like this and the axe goes right into the ground. You're not using some sort of stump to split it on. These are all things that relatively inexperienced people do, and they can be very hard on the edge of an axe. Now this is a very inexpensive axe. I got this axe head for, I think, axe for 12 bucks, and I just put a nice long decent handle on it, so it makes a nice sort of bush crafting type axe for carving and doing sort of tasks like that. It's not particularly heavy enough for felling trees and stuff, but anyway, it's a nice light little axe. The sort of thing I'd lend someone that needs a hatchet. But here's the thing: when someone drives an axe into the ground, okay, for whatever reason, even if they're just going at a tree and it glances off and goes into the ground instead of your foot, that's good, right? But what happens is that you can get a little nick on the blade. So let's just use this marker. I'll make a black mark. I don't know if you can see that. I'll put a black mark right there. Okay? Little black mark. Okay? If that black mark, and I'll just draw this on a piece of paper. If that black mark goes that much into the edge of your blade, you got to remove all that material to get back to a proper edge. And you can't leave that nick in the edge. Okay, if you leave that nick on the edge, it will just continue to wear and tear, and it will not wear evenly. That'll be a weakness in the metal, and that part will just not, you have to file it down until that little nick is completely gone. You have to remove all the material, which means that whole plane, the whole thing has to go all the way back to beyond where the nick begins. Right? So every time you make a mistake and you drive your axe into the ground, hit a rock, or if you're using it to like split pallet wood and you hit a nail or something, or just any sort of mistake like that, right? And you put a nick in the edge, you've got to remove the entire edge and establish an entire new edge in your axe. So if you're at a campground with someone, and I believe Morris Kohansky actually gives this advice as well. You're at a campground somewhere, someone asks to borrow your axe. If you don't know anything about that person and their ability to use an axe, just ask them what they want to do and do it for them. Because let's say they just want to split up a little bit of kindling. That'd take you 10-15 minutes as opposed to an hour or two, right? Because remember, when you take down the edge of your axe, you're going to go with a coarse file and then a finer file and then some kind of I would say 320 grit sandpaper and then 600 grit sandpaper. Maybe take a hone to it, right? To get a nice, beautiful edge. For an axe like this, which you'd use for like fine carving, cutting in, sort of campground type tasks as well. That's a lot of time. And of course, every time you do that, you got less axe head. And you look at your axe, right? It's got a certain, shape to it. It's got a certain organization. It's meant to be a certain length from here to here. There's a once the axe gets a certain shortness, it just doesn't become useful insofar as it was intended to be used a certain way. It was intended to be organized, made, it was intended to have a certain length, a certain sweep, a certain slope, and so on and so forth, right? There's a point past which it just doesn't function well as an axe anymore. And of course, all that depends on how sophisticated you are and what you're using it for, and so on and so forth. If you're just using it to bash and cut things, you can probably remove a lot, right? But I would say, maybe once you've taken an inch of metal off this axe, it's really, even half an inch. Once you've gone back half an inch, right, from, if you lose that much, that much material, half an inch off the axe, it's really, it's still an axe and it can still do axey things, right? But it's really not, look at the way it's made, right? So that's number one, how often are you going to nick it? And how many of these nicks are you going to have to work out? And remember, to work out the nick, you have to take the entire edge off and establish an entire new edge. Okay, there's that. The other thing is, take proper care of it. What does that mean? Once you sharpen an axe, this one's, nicely sharp, not sharp enough to shave by, but pretty darn close, right? It's as sharp as you want an axe to be. Let's say I came out to use this axe. I was going to go help a friend with something, and I give it a little feel like this, and I can feel it grabbing the skin on my thumb. I know it's sharp. Maybe I take this hone to it and go like this before I go out the door. That's it, right? Just same way I do a knife. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 3 passes with a hone on each side. Oh yeah, that's nice, right? Out the door I go, right? So on a given year, maybe even multiple years, depending on how often I use this axe and what I'm using it for, that's all that's needed to maintain the edge. If that doesn't seem to pick it up, maybe I'll just start with a little bit of 320 sandpaper, work it down a little bit. But really, to maintain the edge, that's generally speaking all I do with an axe once I've established a good edge on it. If every time you use your axe you think you're doing something good by taking a coarse, bastard file or an axe file, grinding it to an edge, right? That is going to wear that thing out. If you're in your 20s, that axe might not last you a lifetime, right? Also, it bears mentioning that if you sharpen the axe to, really good sharpness, such that when you run your fingers across it, you can feel it grabbing, you can feel that it's a good edge, right? If you do that with a coarse file, and then you just go use the axe. It's called an axe file, so that should be all you need to sharpen an axe, right? Really, what you've done when you've sharpened the edge of that axe with the coarse file is you've put an edge on the axe to exaggerate. You've put an edge on the axe like that, at a microscopic level, right? It's like a serrated edge. So you got all these little micro points. What do you think's going to happen when you land that into some hardwood, right? All those little edges are going to bend over. Some of them are going to break off, right? Next time you go to use it, you're going to notice it's not biting in very well. So you're going to take that heavy file to it again, get it nice and sharp again, go use it again. All those little micro teeth bend over again and it doesn't feel sharp anymore. So the way to preserve the life of the axe is to put the time in at the front end, right? Use your heavy file until it feels sharp and it kind of looks the way you want. Then use a finer file, right? And every time as you're taking it down, you're looking at the metal. Okay, now for me, I would actually need reading glasses now, but you're looking at the metal and you're seeing, are there little lines or is it just shiny, right? And so, you're going to notice lines on it using this heavy one. You're still going to notice lines using this one here. Once you take your, the same idea with a knife, really. Once you take your, 200, 300 grit sandpaper, you're still going to notice some lines. And once you get down to 600, right? This is just a piece of wood with, car bodywork different grits. This is 600 on this side, 320 on this side. And you can buy one of these kits, you know, comes in a pack like this, right? You get different grits in it. It'll last you years and years and years. You just put it on a stick of wood like this. Nice, get something really flat and straight, right? Cheaper than Japanese sharpening stones. So you get that nice and sharp, really, really sharp. And then instead of having this sort of jagged edge like that, right? Instead you've got, you know, a nice smooth, right? Perfect edge like that instead of this jagged thing here. So now, I mean, still, if you go down far enough at a microscopic level, there's going to be teeth, but they're smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So the impact of driving that into stuff with force, think about the amount of force that's multiplied by having this weight, this wedge in front of the edge, and it on a handle here so you get leverage, right? The thing's just going to stand up to that so much better, the edge, that is to say. Using the axe is going to put way less wear and tear on the edge, and it's going to take very little to get that edge back every time you go to use it. It may just be all you need to do is something like that, right? With a hone to get it perfect again, right? Of course, depending on what you're doing and how good you established it in the first place, right? So yeah, taking proper care of your axe means getting it, you know, beautifully, exquisitely sharp in the first place, and then not doing a lot to maintain it, right? Not, you know, not using, you know, one of these wheels like this, right? Not using a, you know, a mini grinder. Every time it feels dull, using a mini grinder, yeah, you know, all that sort of stuff, right? Once you know, put the time in, you know, you can use machine tools to establish an edge. I have a belt sander here that I like to use for that, because it's just so much easier than going at it with a file, right? But I don't end with the belt sander. I begin with that to just remove most of the material. And then in the end, I've got the thing in a vise and I'm using my files and I'm going by feel and I'm looking, right? And I'm examining as I go. And then I'm going to finer stuff and finer and finer and finer, right? Getting that nice exquisite edge. Put the time in at the front end and just, you know, take care of it and maintain the edge by doing less, right? Give the edge only what it needs to be maintained. Don't you don't need to reestablish an entire plane, right? It might just be that little cutting edge needs a little touch up, right? Every time you use it. And not even every time you use it. I mean, I got an axe I keep out in my gardening shed, and you know, it's just an axe I use out in the yard sort of thing. And I sharpen it once a year. It's always, it never disappoints, right? Once a year, I just, okay, yeah, let's see what, and by sharpening it once a year, I don't go to the heavy file. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that once a year, you know, I look at it, I examine the edge, and if it needs anything, I address it. If it doesn't need anything, you know, it just gets a hone and that's it, right? So if it doesn't need to be sharpened, don't sharpen it, right? I mean, really, how long should the axe last? It really depends on how much material are you removing from the axe head. If you're not removing material from the axe head, then it's going to stand up a lot longer because it's just going to, well, you're just not removing, right? If you're removing material from the axe head all the time, you're not going to have any axe head left eventually, right? So yeah. And I mean, I would say that even crosses on different qualities. I mean, this is a very cheap axe, but I fully expect this thing to still be going when I kick off. And if whichever of my kids or whoever takes this thing after I'm gone takes care of it, should continue on as long as, you know, they're not, you know, taking a millimeter off of it every year sort of thing, right? And not driving it into, you know, hard metal and rocks and stuff like that. So yeah, how long should I expect it to last? A lifetime. So that's it, right? It'll last a lifetime as long as you don't file it all away. I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. And until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Thanks for watching.